I just naturally gravitate towards doing things a little bit more photorealistic sometimes, you know, and I like the smooth look. I like everything to be sort of tightly rendered. You know, I think in college studying Northern Renaissance art, you know, and it was very kind of dark and yet bright and very smooth. I think that's just, you know, what I'm interested in doing. I think that in some of my illustrations, it gets a little bit away from that. You know, it starts getting a little edgier, a little rougher, but generally, I don't feel like it's done unless it's pretty tight. And, you know, again, I like bright colors and I like to have my paint be very smooth. So. I just think it's more interesting. I think that capturing sort of the darker side of people and events is more interesting. I think it's more interesting to see, you know, a baby that's got something strange around it rather than all cutesy and flowery. So I like to, you know, find those moments where, you know, it's kind of like the calm before the storm. Playfulness in a piece of art is very important in certain ways, because if you make it too dark or too disturbing, then you can't keep looking at it for very long. You know, it's like if you look at a Goya, it's amazing, but you can't really, you know, bring yourself to want to look at it often. Whereas I think if something, if your artwork maybe has an element that's a little disturbing or a little dark, and yet there's something playful about it, I think that actually engages you more, makes the people want to look at it more, and then they pay more attention to what they see. And I think with the times we're living in where, you know, a lot of things upsetting are happening in the world, I don't know that I think that artists should make their artwork more playful, but I think a lot of it just comes down to what you naturally do. You know, I think it's your natural style, and, you know, if you try to make it be something that it's not naturally, it might not work, you know. It might be like, oh, that's a little too forced. So I definitely think that the kids that I teach well, in many ways they teach me more about human nature than I would ever have just being an artist or, you know, working at a corporate job or something like that. Some of the kids, you know, they're very, very angry all the time, and you really have to think about why they're so angry and put yourself in their shoes so that you don't lose your patience. And I think that some of that does come out in my artwork. You know, I've done a few paintings of kids. And one I did was just a little postcard that actually was sold in an auction, and it was just a kid's eyes. And you could just look in his eyes and just see, like, huge amounts of pain. And so they're, you know, not all the kids, but some of the kids I work with, they definitely have this element of pain. And while it's hard to deal with on a daily level as a teacher, you know, when they're screaming in your face, it definitely comes out in my artwork. I think when I've had shows and people have looked at these paintings of the kids, they say, oh, you can tell you really care about the kids. And I'm like, oh, can you? Great. I didn't think that was even coming across. But I know there's one painting I have of the 3 boys, and I painted that because there were 3 students that I had the hardest time reaching as a teacher. And so it was cathartic for me to paint them. I felt like maybe I would somehow feel better about them, or, you know, feel less sad about where I think their lives may be going. So I definitely think it influences my artwork, and I think that the kids that I teach don't get enough attention in society. We kind of push them to the side and try to forget they're there. So I think, you know, I would like to put them in my work more. Sometimes it's just a little too painful to put them in my work, but, you know, sometimes they come out. So New York is very, very different from where I grew up. I think that being here, being in New York, and again, I moved here to go to college, and it's so fascinating here. There's so much here to help you grow as an artist that it's just impossible to leave. I feel every time I try, it just doesn't work out. Something happens and I stay. In Brooklyn in particular, though, I feel like there's so many great artists here. There's so much happening all the time. You know, everywhere you go, there's amazing art. So I really think it helps me be a better artist to see what other people are doing. You know, and it's not like, oh, this is what was done 20 years ago. No, this is what was done yesterday. And living in the Gowanus in particular, I know the building I live in, the building I work in, is full of artists, and sometimes they have their studios open and I get to go in and see what they're doing, which is pretty amazing. And even when I'm walking, you know, across the Gowanus Canal, you know, there's a shepherd ferry right down there. It's pretty amazing. You know, you wake up one morning and there's a shepherd ferry there, and it's pretty great when, you know, the street artists put up work overnight and you can go and that's pretty inspiring. So yeah, I'm really glad that I live in Brooklyn, and I definitely think that my artwork is influenced by it. It helps lend itself to the darkness in a way and the playfulness, so yeah, I think it's good. The humor is a little dark, so it's great.